Hello, my name is Joanne Verbanic, and I am a recovering paranoid schizophrenic. I was ashamed for 14 years. I thought it was my fault that I had this illness. I realize now that schizophrenia is a chemical imbalance in the brain as well as a psychological emotional disorder. It's a no-fault illness. It's not my mother's fault, and it's not my fault. I am ashamed no longer. In 1970, I started experiencing voices telling me to kill myself and having delusions of grandeur and paranoia. I was in an alcoholic marriage and was under a lot of stress and had 2 young children. And we were filing bankruptcy, and the judge said, sell the home, and I had my first psychotic break. I didn't know what was happening to me. My husband was terrified as to what was happening to me, and he took me to a hospital, and they gave me a shot. From what I can remember, I really don't remember what was happening. But I was driving along the highway with my husband, and I attempted to jump out of a moving automobile because the voices were telling me to kill myself. And I thought the TV and radio were sending me messages and talking to me. That he grabbed the door handle to save me and pulled into a state police department where they called an ambulance. And I was hallucinating, thought people were laughing at me, the police, and everything else. I was totally out of reality. And they took me to the Pontiac State Hospital where I'm not sure why I didn't stay in that hospital. I think it's because I had insurance. But they transported me to Kingswood Hospital, a private psychiatric hospital, where somehow they managed to convince me to sign myself in. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was. I thought everybody was in there. I thought the FBI was after me and I was going to be murdered. And I spent time in seclusion in a straitjacket. I spent the allotted time for the insurance, the 45 days, and I had 18 electroshock treatments, was on Thorazine and Stelazine, and I was told, because in those days they didn't tell you your diagnosis, I was told I had a nervous breakdown. Well, after the 45 days, the psychiatrist that I had met in the hospital suggested I go to the state hospital for further long-term care. I had 2 young children at home, and I chose to go home. He wasn't going to commit me, but he gave me that choice. And I went home, and I could barely function and take care of my children. But I progressively was getting a little bit better on the medication and seeing a psychiatrist. But the next year it happened again. And for me, it's the paranoia. I have delusions of paranoia, and it snowballs, and all of a sudden I'm out of reality. That's how it starts with me. So the next year I ended up in the hospital again, Kingswood Hospital, only a little more wiser and a little more insight into my illness. And I had another so-called nervous breakdown. Well, my psychiatrist at the time told me that I'd have to get out of the alcoholic marriage. And I told my husband that he must leave, and that was to save my sanity. And I worked before I had my first psychotic break at a finance company for 9 years. I had a year of secretarial science but dropped out of college and married my husband when I was 18. And so I needed a better job to take care of my children. The thought never occurred to me to go on disability. I always thought I had to work to take care of and feed my children. So I applied at the Ford Motor Credit Company as a cashier in 1973. And 3 years after my first psychotic break, still thinking I had nervous breakdowns, not knowing my diagnosis. I didn't know that I had schizophrenia until 5 years after I had my first breakdown. And I applied there, and fortunately, a month later, I was offered the job. And in the application, they didn't ask if I had a mental illness, but on the physical, they did ask if I had a mental illness. And I put down that I had a nervous breakdown, because that's what I was told. I was telling the truth, because it said if you lied, you could be terminated, and I thought it may happen to me again. But then I thought all my troubles were over. I got a good job, and now my life is going to be okay. But unfortunately, in 14 years of having a job at Ford Motor Credit, I had 5 hospitalizations, 5 psychotic breaks. However, I had several promotions too. The Ford Motor Credit didn't know my diagnosis, but they knew I was in a psychiatric hospital. And I was treated with dignity and respect, and still received the promotions that I worked so hard to earn. Well, in 1984 was my last major hospitalization, and I have a younger brother, Tim, who was in the state hospital for 17 years for paranoid schizophrenia. And he's just been in a group home for the past 9 years, and he's doing better than he ever has in his life. They never thought that they would ever be able to mainstream him. And I wanted to help the less fortunate mentally ill people. I know how blessed I am, how fortunate I am to be where I am today. I had a good psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, hospitalization. I had good mental health care. I believe in recovery. People do recover from this illness. People can recover to whatever their potential is. Each individual has their own potential. And I wrote a letter to Tom Sovine of the Mental Health Association, volunteer available. I didn't tell him of my schizophrenia. I just told him that I worked for Ford Motor Credit and I wanted to get involved to help the mentally ill. He contacted me, and after a few meetings, I felt comfortable enough to share of my background. And he asked me if I would work on the issue of stigma to help erase the stigma for the mentally ill. It was a very big decision for me to go public to help erase the stigma, because my employer did not know my diagnosis. I was a bankruptcy specialist for Ford Motor Credit, and I negotiated with attorneys in Chapter 7, 11, 12, and 13 bankruptcies. At one time, I handled even at least 2,000 cases. And I knew if I went public, I didn't know what would happen if I went public, whether I could be demoted or what could happen, but I knew I wanted to help the mentally ill. Well, in March of '85, Dr. E. Fuller Torrey, who wrote the book Surviving Schizophrenia, was on a book tour and trying to help erase the stigma for the mentally ill. And he came to town, and the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, who I got involved with, their family and friends of the mentally ill support group, asked me if I would go public and appear on national TV with Dr. Torrey. Well, like I said, it was a very big decision for me, so I talked to my supervisor about it. I didn't tell him schizophrenia. I just told him that they wanted me to go public. And he said, contact Public Affairs. So I contacted the Public Affairs Department of Ford Motor Credit, and Carolyn Burke of the Public Affairs Department, who was in charge at that time, said, Joanne, do you want to do it? I said, Carolyn, I want to help. She said, then do it. We support you 100%. So we encourage you and support you to do it. So I went public that year, and I appeared on national TV and radio to help erase the stigma. And I felt like my life had changed. The burden was lifted.